Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Meet the Winner 2020 Pritzker Fellows event, our big kickoff for the Fellows program this quarter. I am Bert Croft. I'm one of the Fellows interns this year, and I'm really happy to be here with all of our 5 incoming and 1 returning fellow for this quarter. I'm just going to here to give a quick intro to all of them, and then kind of kick it off for everyone. So first off, we have Anna Galland, former executive director of Move On and progressive activists. We have Joe Ferguson, former inspector general of Chicago. Yulin Cruz, former mayor of San Juan. Sarah Smarsh, journalist and author of Heartland, a memoir on working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth, a book I am myself working through slowly. Mark Campbell, campaign manager of Glenn Youngkin's run for Virginia governor. And returning with us is Lotfullah Najafizada, the Afghan journalist and director of TOLONews. And with us, of course, is our illustrious MC for tonight, Alicia Sams, director of the Fellows program.
Thank you, Burke, for that introduction. Sorry, I was on mute. And I want to welcome you all here tonight. That's a great start to the quarter. I would like to just go around, and we've had the benefit last week of having a really nice orientation where we had the chance to get to know each other. And I am hoping that tonight you students are going to get to know this group of fellows as well, because it's a really impressive bunch. So I'm going to go around and ask you all to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about this quarter. And first up on my screen is Julene. So if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
See, I did the same thing, Alicia. Hello, everybody. My name is Yulin Cruz. I am the former mayor of San Juan and also former member of the House of Representatives in Puerto Rico. For those of you that may have heard the news in the past 4 years, Puerto Rico has gone through a lot. And in many ways, it's been a laboratory for many things, for gentrification, for the theory of chaos. You make everything be a chaos, like Naomi would call it, and make sure that those that have a lot have more and those that have less continue to have less. So I'm going to be talking about using Puerto Rico as a platform for how we need to develop our democracy. My first talk will be this Thursday. It will be Speak Up, Stand Up. And I'll be talking about the importance of having a voice. I don't believe there's anyone that's voiceless. I believe that there are people that have a platform that can be heard. And just confirmed that I will have as a guest former Senator Nina Turner from Ohio, who's now in the Young Turks, and her and I were both 4 of the co-chairs of the Bernie Sanders campaign for president. So I'm looking forward to learning from you, talking to you, having you talk to me, and just learning from each other and experiencing what each other has to say and look forward to. A lot of hope.
Thank you. Speaking of hope, we just had a hopeful seminar with Anna today. So Anna, why don't you go next, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm Anna Galland. I'm an organizer. I was previously the executive director of Move On Civic Action, the grassroots national progressive campaigning group. I'm currently the chair of that organization. And I'm someone who has spent a lot of time in my life, similar to Julene and many of our other fellows, in fact, in trying to make our country a place where there is really an opportunity for everyone to thrive. And I am deeply concerned at this point in my own life with the state of our democracy. I think it's ailing. I think that the mob that stormed the US Capitol in January of 2021 was a recent vivid display of a much longer term and deeper multi-front crisis. And yet I have hope. And I think one of the things that's important for us to do together as people of goodwill who are invested in the future of our country and planet is to think deeply about how we can renew and revitalize our own democracy. And in service of that, we will talk with social movement activists, we'll talk with high integrity politicians, public officials, journalists, technologists, other sorts of leaders in our society over the course of 8 weeks to try and do our bit to think through what is needed from us with a movement building lens to revitalize this country in this particular moment in history. And I will say, I was so moved by my first seminar where the students that were there brought just a kind of fresh perspective, a real energy. People were really ready to dive right in. And I look forward to continuing that kind of dynamic conversation in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Anna. Lotfullah, welcome back. You are next on my screen. So you want to tell us a bit about what you'll be sharing with us in February?
Thank you, Alicia. I think I'm very lucky that I get this chance twice. I had a great few weeks in Chicago last year. I look forward to returning very soon to continue to talk about what happened in Afghanistan and why, and what are the lessons learned for Afghans and as well as the international community, particularly the United States, who invested so much in blood and treasure in the past 20 years. And now the country is back in the hands of the Taliban, and where the Taliban will take the country. So what we learned from promoting democracy in a society like Afghanistan, and what would be the implications now that the Taliban are ruling Afghanistan once again. What will the Afghan women do? What is going to happen to civil society? And media in particular. We talked a little bit about some of these topics, but I think a lot has changed since I was there 2 months ago. So I look forward to continuing on some of those discussions, but at the same time, on the positive side of how Afghanistan has changed in the past 20 years, and how the younger generation of Afghans will deal with the situation, and remain hopeful for the future. Because as colleagues said, if you don't have hope, it would be very difficult for you to continue. So I look forward to meeting new fellows, new students. I totally agree as a former fellow, as a returning fellow, with takeaways that it is a two-way street. We learn so much from the students, the researchers, professors, and most importantly, the great people at the IOP.
Thank you, Lotfullah. Next on my circle of fellows is Mark. So Mark, tell us a little bit about what you'll be talking about, please.
Sure. One of the things that greatly fascinates me at the moment, as having been involved in campaigns for over 40 years, is how hateful and extreme they've gotten over the last 4 or 5. So when I was a child, my godfather, like my actual godfather, was the governor of New Jersey, a guy by the name of Bill Cahill. So I was literally involved in a campaign every year since I was 5 years old. I mean, whether it be carrying literature or setting up chairs or whatever. So to me, it was football and campaign is what you did in the fall. I was also one of the first high school seniors in the country to run for his own school board, because the school board budget hadn't passed for 6-7 years. And, I was class president, and the superintendent and I were talking, and he was bemoaning the fact that the budget couldn't get passed. So I said, well, what if I run? And he says, but you're only 17. I said, but the law is if I'm 18 by the time election day comes, I can run. So my whole campaign was, please don't vote for me, but pass the damn budget. So that actually happened, and that was good. And there's a very funny story involving my mother in the campaign, but I won't bore any of you with that just yet. I am a lifelong Republican, but I'm a card-carrying moderate, which means that in Texas, I'm a Democrat, and in Pennsylvania, I'm a Republican. But my clients are all Republicans, and obviously I don't do a lot of work in Texas because I really don't think the extreme left or the extreme right are doing anything for any of us other than making money for themselves or promoting a position that in the long run history shows you that extreme left fails, extreme right fails, and it's only when we talk together in a civil way. What I want to talk about during the seminar is how campaigns can mold themselves in such a way that they're beneficial to the public and not just a lot of noise and a lot of anger. We're going to talk about electability. We're going to talk about the language that we should, that we could possibly use. And, also, I want to tell the students that they will be shocked how much what they learned during this process will stay with them for a lifetime. I remember being this age and being greatly influenced by people. And fortunately, they were, thoughtful, common sense people. And I am sure that this outstanding group of fellows will do nothing but improve the dialogue of our culture and our nation going forward. So that's kind of it, but I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Thank you, Mark. I have to say I agree. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit?
Sure. I've been a journalist for about 20 years, and I have to say that being surrounded by folks who are concerned about the public good and civic progress, that's always been sort of my bent and an aspect of my personality. But in terms of my calling in the world, I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I chose journalism as a profession because when I entered J school in the late 90s, there was a term that was kind of falling out of fashion, and I don't think has come back in fashion quite yet, but is probably ascendant at the moment, which was civic journalism. So I really wanted to be a government watchdog, convey information to the people with as little bias as possible. That was how I was trained as in terms of an aspiration, for the purpose of equipping the people with the ability to be good citizens, whatever that means. And my profession took a turn for the worse not long after I entered the media fray. Newspapers that I was trained to write and report for collapsed in many corners, not least of which the rural Midwest where I'm from and where I'm joining you from right now, actually. And so I found that in that, increasingly narrowed zone of folks with typically relative privilege who were being heard, whether as reporters, which always involves some implicit bias, or as commentators wherein the bias is explicit, that I could be of best service within that realm by talking about socioeconomic class. And that's because of my own personal stories. So it's sort of ironic that I was trained to be as objective as possible. And I've ended up very much wearing my opinions on my sleeve for the sake of elevating the conversation around class, one that I have found for a long time has been woefully mishandled and underhandled, which is really a hallmark of the American mythos to say that this is a meritocracy, full stop. We have fortunately in recent decades begun to better address inequities like race, gender, and other identities that fall on a sort of power continuum. Class, of course, has always been with us. We've been in denial of it for several centuries, and in recent decades, quite terrible at discussing it. The topic is weaponized by some for political purposes, by others is ignored, and increasingly it does receive attention today, but sometimes in a very clunky manner involving stereotypes and pat binaries like red and blue, or educated and uneducated, or rural urban. The rural urban divide is a narrative that I'll be very eager to discuss with students this quarter. So we'll be talking about class. The first seminar, which is tomorrow, and I'm very excited for, will just be kind of looking at where, having a conversation to build a foundation for moving forward with this topic. And throughout the quarter, there will be a number of guest speakers, elected officials, authors, journalists, spiritual leaders, and an array of folks who, in their own rights have tended to this issue, which I believe is wound up in no less than the fate of democracy, which I'm sure will be a recurring theme this quarter for good reason. So no pressure to us, but to save the world. So I look forward to meeting a lot of you tomorrow at 12:30.
Thank you. And last but not least, Joe Ferguson.
My goodness. Thanks for leaving me last after all of that. And I'm hoping everyone's feeling inspired because the brief opportunity that I've had to spend with the other fellows in this particular cohort has inspired me, and I'm re-inspired by everything that they've said this evening. I'm Joe Ferguson. And I'm the nuts and bolts guy of sorts in this aspirational, inspirational group. I have spent over a decade as an inspector general for a major city, Chicago. And in that sense, have gotten inside and pulled apart and tried to point to ways of better performance for what everybody else is talking about and trying to get at, which is the opportunity to govern politics, policy, advocacy, activism. All of that leans into an effort to try to prevail in a bid to get access to and influence the operation of government. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons I believe that we are in this somewhat adversarial moment within our society is that government is underperforming. And the job of an inspector general is to be assessing in a number of different ways the efficacy, the equity, the economy, and the efficiency of how government delivers to the people. And it's not merely about malfeasance, it's about execution and the competency of execution of core missions. And in the absence of that, we don't have government legitimacy. People gradually lose hope. They feel that government is failing them, both in the particular and in the broad strokes. So accountability is important, and that's what inspectors general do. And that is what I'm going to be devoting my seminar time to, is the role of the inspector general function, which is in the history of this country, a relatively new phenomenon, and one that generally is not talked about in civics courses. We talk about executives and legislators, but there is this other component that's actually part of government that actually has as its client the people. And so aside from talking about the function and the role of inspectors general and oversight agencies, I'm going to be talking about it in relation to other critical components of an effective democracy. So the relationship of the work of an inspector general or oversight function to the media, and we'll have a class in which we'll bring in journalists, to civil society advocates. We'll have a class in which we'll bring in leaders in advocacy organizations, activists, to talk about the synergies of their work with an oversight function. Government officials, who are both the subjects of and the beneficiaries of independent oversight, and a component of the course, the seminar will be a couple of modules devoted to the oversight of policing and police reform in what is obviously not just a fraught moment for society, which is really struggling, but also a really fraught moment for this community, which has had a number of really troubling and serious incidents that have occurred in and about the University of Chicago campus and Hyde Park. That has touched off, from what I understand, is a really high level and important conversation that is the conversation that we need to be having nationally. And so I'm really both excited and a little bit scared to step into the middle of all of that. And as I said to one of my ambassadors early today, if I'm in a comfort zone for too long, that tells me it's time to swim to deeper water. And the deep water right now is around policing. So we're devoting a portion of the seminar with respect to oversight to policing. And to echo the words of Naftala, I want as much to bring to you information and knowledge about avenues for exploration of how you can make an impact on society through this other type of government function. But I'm also very excited about the prospect of you impacting my thinking, you helping to take down some of the siloed, grooved ways that I've come to see the world. And so I'm very, very excited for that dynamic, and delighted to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Joe. I have a few questions for you all, and then I know you all are dropping questions in the chat, so we'll get to students shortly. But Yulin, we had some really great conversations last week, and one of the things you said, and this is a big one, is telling truth is a revolutionary act. So I want you to just expand a little bit, either with an example of when it felt like a revolutionary act to you, or just tell us a little bit about what your thinking was when you said that.
Well, it's the sign that's in the back there. It's George Orwell said, in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. When I campaigned for mayor of San Juan, I was very famous for my infamous and very impolite T-shirts. So I wore this T-shirt a lot that said, "The truth is always revolutionary." Because if you come to think about it, when you tell the truth, you're obviously inconveniencing someone. Somebody's going to be upset by you telling the truth. And of course, I had my own experience with President Donald Trump when he was talking about Puerto Rico being a good news story, and me telling the truth and calling him on it and saying, no, it's not a good news story. It's a people are dying story, right? The only president that I've ever met has been President Donald Trump. And I recall shaking his hand and saying, this is not about politics. This is about saving lives. So the truth of the matter is that the status quo benefits those that don't want the status quo to change. And I think it was either Anna or Sarah mentioned that, this world is moving away from being binary. But when you talk about speaking up and standing up, it is a binary choice. You either choose to stand up or stand down and speak up, or become complicit of a narrative that is totally not going to be beneficial to you. There's a skit on Saturday Night Live. You can look it up on YouTube where I'm calling President Trump and asking him for help, and he's giving a lot of smart remarks about it. But it goes to what Joe was talking about. What happens when governments don't deliver? And I was a mayor for 8 years, and I delivered in some things, and in other areas I did not. What happens when governments don't deliver? What is our do we have a choice as citizens? I don't think we have a choice. I think we have to stand up as citizens and call and bring into action our voices, because we would be surprised. Sometimes we think our voice are not powerful enough. When I opened my mouth on September 29th and I said, we are dying here and you are killing us with your bureaucracy and your inefficiency, I had no idea those words were gonna go around the globe. I had no idea. But I learned that the sound of one voice can echo the sentiments of so many, whether you're Republican or Democrat. See, at the core, I think we want the same things. We want, and we were talking at orientation, and I said, no child ever says, I want to be a drug lord when I grow up, or no little girl says, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up. Nobody says that. we put ourselves in a position where those that speak up, and we have to know speaking up has a cost. And that's something that Lotfullah will be able to talk for days about. And Sarah, speaking up has a cost. The question is, are you willing not to pay that cost and just provide others the complicit behavior of your silence? So it is a revolutionary. Run right an hour, the soldier that wrote the memo to Senate talking about the Mile High Massacre, talked about the complicit, how complicit people become because they're afraid of what governments and their power can do. I was afraid of what happened. What would happen to me if I shut up? What would happen to me if I don't tell the truth? And we're getting to points, the US has reached and landmark numbers of hospitalizations, landmark numbers of deaths regarding COVID. Everywhere we look, whether it be race, whether it be climate justice, whether it be financial justice, racial justice, people have to speak up to help government officials and to give government officials the talking points for putting together an action plan. Oftentimes people think it's the other way around. So speaking up and standing up, in my opinion, is not an option. It is an obligation for those that want to make the world a better place, which is in no way a romantic thing. It is actually, I think, what we are put here to do, to respect one another. I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, Chinese, or Muslim. Your child needs to be fed. Your child needs to have a dignified life. You need to have access to COVID testing. And we all need to live in a safe environment. We all want the same things. It's those that benefit from separating us and from teaching us to speak in divisive ways that want us to think that we're all that different when we really are not.
Thank you. Thanks. And on that note of sort of the challenge of governance and effective governance, I just want to go back to you, Joe, quickly. And what do you think it is that gets in the way of effective governments? But I mean, I know there are a million things that get in the way, but could you point to one or two things that really are stopping us, possibly in our cities, since that's where you have the most experience?
Yeah, we're talking an existential question there, and I'm gonna actually take it to an existential place. Governments are human institutions and have all of the failings and challenges of humans and collectives of humans. And in an interview once, I offered up the notion that whether it was by nature or nurture, I've been lucky in that all of my dealings in Chicago and all of my dealings as a federal prosecutor for over a decade beforehand, no one's ever found my price. I've never been confronted with what I can be bought out for. Not that people are coming at me with bribes or anything like that. But you know what? We all, at some level, as much as we would like to think not, in various circumstances and contexts, there's something of a price that would bring us to acquiesce, to yield, to settle. And I go to acquiescence and yielding and settling in price for this reason. Government populated by people means that the folks that we need to do things are mostly folks that just want to get along, that have families, that don't want to lose their jobs, that don't want to stick their necks out, that would put all of that at risk. And so what we need to have are mechanisms that spur higher performance above that which those sort of compromises that many people make to get along would yield to, and guardrails to prevent those circumstances where people actually can be bought off. But it's that essential human quality. It's like government isn't going to solve all of our problems. It's people trying to work on problems that are intractable. And any system that we devise in a particular moment that solves what we regard to be the problems of the moment will be obsolete within a short amount of time. Why? Because the context and the circumstances and the dynamics will change. It's a continuous process. But you know, as was said in the old cartoon comic strip Pogo, we have met the enemy, and it is us.
Thank you. We're going to go to questions in a few minutes, but I just want to follow up on that with Sarah. Since your job is to tell the stories of people and help bring their voices, what do you see, and this is another big existential question, what role does journalism play, and Lotfullah, this is a question for you as well, in bringing those voices to the fore, and are our journalists missing something, or are we bringing these voices forward?
Sure. You know, I think that many of the same criticisms and critiques that Joe was getting at in relation to government and as an institution, we could also fairly levy at the media, which, you know, is a general, often disparaged categorization of an extremely diverse, vast ecosystem of information in the 21st century. But you know, I think that a lot of the most vocal and most privileged and echoing chambers of that ecosystem have a price. And for many of them, the price is ad sales and profit and revenue. And that's not to say that the vast majority of journalists who I know aren't working in earnest toward a better world on the ground, but often their ability to achieve that is compromised by essentially the business model under which the news is being transmitted. And so, you know, I think that for that reason, you know, that's why the majority of this country right now isn't so much receiving news as it is receiving, infotainment, you know, is a fairly recent term that's meant to provoke the emotions and incite typically negative emotions like anger, outrage. You have the two talking heads has been a cliche for decades at this point, since, you know, the ascent of cable news and even before that. But now in this moment, there's this, I think, kind of simultaneous conundrums of those, you know, the compromised mission statements related to business models that I just mentioned, and also our total lack of grip now on what narrative are we all even centering around at the proverbial water cooler. And of course, there is no longer one, and that's a good thing in some ways, and it's a terribly dangerous thing in others. And so ultimately, I do think that there must be, while there's a lot of incredible reporting going on, and a lot of earnest reporters and journalists doing good work. And most of them, by the way, aren't getting rich doing it. All the same, there is something broken about the way that information is currently transmitted. If we find ourselves as a society, you know, at such a disconnect. If my industry were doing its job in a way that this moment calls for, and I believe that it's evolving toward that when we're not there yet, then so many of these fissures would not be so deep, for sure.
Thank you. I'm going to go to student questions because I know we're short on time. And this first question is from Ramiz, and apologies, Basketiar. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but he's a youth activist. And this is for Mark and for Julene. Do you think it's the right time to lower the voting age to 16? Mark, do you want to take that? You're on mute.
Yep. Honestly, I've never thought about it before. It's an interesting concept. And, 16 seems to be the new 21 as far as exposure to life and all of those kinds of things. Off the cuff, I would probably say no, only because, in all the research that I've seen, younger voters tend not to do their homework as much as older voters because they're less invested in the culture or the government or taxes or, so I would be okay looking into it. It's a fascinating question. And I do think that considering what a relatively miserable job my generation's done, maybe it's a good idea.
I think that what we want to make sure is that does not then become the threshold for other things, for changing certain convictions, or for buying cigarettes or other things that have not to do with voting. But I'll tell you what we did in San Juan while I was mayor. We did participatory budgeting, and there was one particular community that asked for the youth of 16 or more to vote on the project. So I think that if we're looking at local level, the question could be made, the argument could be made that at the local level, for the local communities, yes, people could vote at the age of 16. I think I would need a little bit more research to say whether that should be the case at the at the presidential level or vice presidential level and congressional levels. But I think at the state and local level, we can start moving towards that. It's definitely there's a different agenda there, and there's a lot more power in wanting to do a lot of the grassroots work that needs to be done. And I see a lot of that, like in climate justice and climate change. A lot of the activism that is going on is people that are between the ages of 12 and 18 years old, because frankly, you're the ones that won't be able to breathe, will probably be dead. But you're the ones that probably not be able to breathe and I hope that time never comes. So I agree with Mark. It's something that it's a good conversation to have. And I would start with doing some groundwork at the local level.
And I'm just curious, since you work with so many different coalitions and have done so much movement building, have you thought about it, or do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no one silver bullet to fixing the crisis of engagement and impact that so many of us are feeling. And so what I sense behind the question is a real desire to find something electrifying, something transformative, something that could change the dynamic, that could empower an up and coming generation. And my sense is that impulse, I want to say yes to the impulse. And I'm not sure, I'm actually with Mark about whether that particular policy prescription is right. That particular changing of the rules. There are many other rules I would change first, like making sure that people have access to the ballot in upcoming elections, that we have confidence that we can certify the results, we can certify the will of the voters after the next election cycle. I would start with focusing on that personally. But again, I think that the impulse to look afresh at a system that seems to not be serving us is a beautiful impulse, and I only can celebrate that. I do think I wanted to add, I feel like maybe it was Joe who said it's kind of an existential moment that we're living through here. And I think, right, asking questions like, should we be lowering the voting age, is one expression of a common thread that many of us are feeling right now, which is we're all looking for answers, I think. We're living through mass suffering and death from a global plague. We're in the midst of the winter right now in Chicago, but the planet is effectively on fire. And we're in a kind of crisis of social trust here in the United States that manifests in so many different ways that we can't actually agree on fundamental truths about whether even Joe Biden was legitimately elected in 2020, which of course he was. So there's a lot that feels big and hard. And in the face of that, I want to encourage us to think towards both the kind of individual courage, that kind of speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, or speaking truth, even in the context of others not listening, that I think Julien has spoken powerfully to. And I also want to encourage all of us, as we're engaging in discussions this semester on this campus and elsewhere, to think about collective solutions to what we face. I think that the challenges that we face are country-sized, government-sized, global-sized, more often than they're individual-sized or bite-sized, and really deeply wrestling with how we find a kind of justified trust in one another and how we move together towards kind of a sense of common purpose for the renewal of the democracy. Like, that's the deep questions that I hear so many of us asking in so many different ways.
And Alicia, if I may, I think Anna touched on something very good. The question really could be about how do we make sure that more people come into the political arena, not the partisan arena, but the political arena. How do we engage more people? Something that Anna and Sarah and of course Mark have done beautifully. How do we make sure that we give some platform to the next generation, which is the current generation, coexisting with the next and the generation that is already here? And how do we all coexist so that we can get nick and pick what's best for all of us?
Right. Well, and taking it out of the United States, we have a question for Lotfullah, which is another big one. Lotfullah, also from Hermes, where do you see Afghanistan in the next 5 years?
I think maintaining the status quo for the Taliban is a difficult one. They are definitely on lifeline for support and keeping their rule. The Taliban will have to revisit some of their strategies that they have unveiled in the past 5 months. I think the Taliban will face certain challenges from non-Taliban groups, be it armed resistance or demonstrations like Afghan women going out on the streets and protest. I think some of the brave Afghan women that we see are protesting is something that a lot of us didn't expect. But at the same time, I think the Taliban's internal disputes will also define whether they will remain as a united group. Because being an insurgency is one thing, but being a government is another. Being government, you have to deal with a lot of things, right? You have to wake up every morning and clean the city of 5 million people in Kabul and deliver services and food, and provide security and maintain good relations with the rest of the world. I think the Taliban are definitely not ready for that. I'm not sure if they will be anytime soon. So that will change. Do we see signs of the Taliban changing for better? Not much. They are arresting journalists. They are going after activists. They are imprisoning people who are critical of the Taliban rule. They are not necessarily engaging with the region. They do not understand that in Afghanistan being such a diverse country needs a diverse political representation. So to sum it up, I think it's not going to be the same. Not in the next 5 years, but I think not in the next year or two. I hope we're not going to go back to another civil war, because that will be lose-lose for everyone. If we can come up with in the situation and with a plan where all Afghans seem represented, and reestablish our relationship with the rest of the world, open up the country. It's a pariah state at the moment. I think that will help everyone, because we don't want Afghanistan again to be a country where other countries, including the US, or primarily the US, feels threatened from. And that was the core objective why the US went to Afghanistan 20 years ago. So that needs to be stopped. As well as I think the regional consensus isn't there. A lot of countries in the region are happy with the departure of the US. They think the Taliban defeated America. And countries like China, Iran, or Russia, they're probably happy the way US left. But they have soon realized that they have ended up with something that they did not really wish for. A country totally dependent on all of them. So let's see. I think it's going to be way more difficult. I hope the next 5 years will not be a continuation of undoing some of the progress that we have made in the past 20 years.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alexandra Patsakis, who is going to ask her question on video.
Hello, my name is Alexandra, and I'm a fourth year in the college majoring in sociology and global studies. Firstly, thank you all so much for being here. I have a question for Ms. Cruz. What were your experiences like as a woman in public service and government? And do you have any advice to any young women like myself who are considering careers in public service?
I said, thank you for calling me Ms. Cruz. You can call me Julene. There is no doubt in my mind that there is a difference that plays out when you are a woman in seeking to be elected in government. If you have a very distinct opinion about something, you're opinionated or hard to work with. If you're a man and you have an opinion, you're just a person of principle. If you are passionate about what you're doing, you're just very hard to get along. But if a man is passionate, it's just that they really know where they're headed. So there really truly is a difference in the way the media portrays you in the things that people are concerned about. It's not only journalists, it's voters too. Look at people in a different way. All of a sudden it's, you're taking things too personal, where politics is nothing if it's not personal. People dying of hunger is personal. It's -7 degrees, it feels like, here in South Hadley, Massachusetts. And it's personal to me that there are people out there living in homes with no electricity and no heat. So you have to know that. But on the other hand, it is so much, I think Joe said that they had not found his price because he's a decent man. But even Mother Teresa, right, had a currency. Her currency was she wanted souls. There was some goodness is what she wanted. So that there is a certain feeling that you get out of doing good. There's a certain feeling that you get out of seeing the transgender flag just out there at City Hall for the first time ever, and what it meant to the transgender population, or doing the first transgender clinic ever, or ensuring that voters have their right to vote, protected. You can really, I know I sound very maybe childish, but you can really change the world. You may not be able to do everything you want, but as long as whatever you do with your heart, and make sure that it does the most amount of good for the most amount of people, and you do it in an alliance. And if the only thing that I can do is share with you that whatever you do, if you put your heart into it, and I truly mean you devote your time and you put your heart into it, And you don't do it for a reason of being in the news, or you do it for the right reason, which is of doing good. You will be successful no matter if you're on a PTA meeting or if you're in a school board like Mark, wanted to be, or if you're in rural America like Sarah, or if you're moving on. I have a little thing besides my bed in Puerto Rico that's keep moving, it says. So Anna would get a kick at that. But look, I listened to Lotfullah, and it's something that you have to keep in mind, Alexandra. And my mother says, nobody has to ever do anything. Keep in mind that you want to leave wherever. Where are you at right now?
I'm in Southern California.
Southern California with nice weather. Thank you very much. But if you look at Southern California, there are people that spend their lives in the fields of Oxnard, California, just so that you and I can eat strawberries. And when we bite into that strawberry, we don't even think about that. There are people in the Midwest, rural America, that spend their life just so that we all can eat. And we don't think about that. All of a sudden we start thinking, are they Republicans or are they Democrats? The only advice that I can share with you is this is a time for alliance. This is a time for coming together. This is not the time for division. I don't give a cahoot if somebody is a Democrat, a Libertarian, a Republican, as long as we move in a path of alliance, of hope, and of love. Because if you truly love a person, no matter who they are, I don't want a little girl in Afghanistan not to have the right to fulfill her dream of going to school. Why is that my problem? Why is that my problem in South Hadley? Because my grandmother at some point was one of those little girls in Puerto Rico, poor, dirt poor, that almost could not fulfill her dream to go to school. So I believe, and that's the great thing about Joe, Sarah, Anna, Mark, Lotfullah, and myself, we all are part of a higher consciousness. And I'll tell you this very short, true anecdote. There's these birds called blue tits. Their heads are blue. And they were in Australia and in London. And there was a drought in Australia, and they started picking the foil top of the milk cartons to drink the milk. All of a sudden, unbeknownst to anyone, the blue tits in London started doing the exact same thing. So how did they know? So we are all part of this humanity that we insist on dividing ourselves, but we're not. So all I have to tell you, Alexandra, is that don't let anyone tell you that you cannot. Don't let anyone try to silence your voice. There is going to be a bully everywhere you look, whether it's in the classroom, in the boardroom, in the White House, anywhere you look, there's bound to be a bully somewhere. And the bullies are men and women. They don't have gender. But if your heart is in the right place, just push on, because just the fight will be enough of a reward for you.
Thanks, Julene. I think we have time for, excuse me, a few more. The next is from Henry Cantor, who's a first year in the college. Henry, do you want to?
Hi, everyone. Good to see all of you. I got to speak with Joe the other day, but I look forward to seeing all of you around campus when hopefully we can safely return. My question is about hope. So a few of you mentioned kind of the evocation of hope, especially during a time kind of punished with cynicism and distrust in our government. So for those fellows, where do you draw that hope from? Is it something spiritual? Is it from lived experiences? And if it is from lived experiences, how are those of us who don't really know a different time, how can we kind of practice and move forward with that hope?
I'll take a whack at a very interesting question. So let me just give you an example. I know that the Trump era, this too shall pass. I know that the majority of Americans, Republicans and Republicans in Congress, know exactly what happened and know that it was an assault and know all those things. And eventually everyone will be able to admit what's going on. So Republicans are now in a very tough spot. You have to be for Trump or against Trump. In the Youngkin campaign, we were completely neutral and said as little as possible and talked about the issues. And I have hope because dealing with all these folks, everyone knows exactly what happened. Everybody knows what the truth is. And then they immediately pivot to the southern border with several million people coming over illegally and say, well, that's why we don't admit to this, because we have to fight against something else. It's convoluted, I know, and I think it's batshit crazy, pardon my French, but you have to have hope. I mean, for example, listening to your question and the intelligence and the depth, I have a sneaking suspicion that this program is going to do more to give me hope than anything I've done recently. So I hope that's a little bit of an answer.
That's a common refrain. Anna, you talked about the discipline of hope today. So can you quickly just answer that and then we'll take the last question?
Yeah, sure. I think it's the question right now. I think we are in a serious situation as a collective project, as a democracy, as a country, as a globe, thinking about the footprint of the United States around the world. And I think of hope as something that you have to sustain as a practice. The discipline of hope is essential to help keep moving forward, even when things are very dark. I'm very fond of a quote by Rebecca Solnit, the wonderful writer, where she says that hope is not a lottery ticket that you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It's an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency, and hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures, from the grinding down of the poor and marginal. So that to me is an important way of understanding hope, that hope is a push towards action. It's not a kind of psychological crutch. I always am skeptical at the notion of self-care. I'd rather see community care. I'd like to see us taking care of each other and incentivizing each other to move towards taking care of the democracy itself. So anyway, I love the question. I love that you're thinking about it. And I think my hope for all of us is that we will understand hope as itself an imperative to keep us in motion, doing the work that needs to be done to find common purpose and move towards a country where everyone can thrive.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And thank you, Henry. Before we go to Gabriel, our last question, I also see that Joe has his hand up. So did you have a comment, Joe?
Yeah, I do. On the subject of hope, and whoever wants to talk about 16-year-olds and voting, I'm happy to engage. There's actually some models of things that are going on in Chicago that separate out participation from voice, from representation. And actually high school students, there is a vehicle with the new police or public safety civilian oversight commission where there's to be representation at the high school level. And that is not on the basis of expanding the vote. And so there's some space to be occupied that gets us a little bit closer. On the subject of hope, though, which is so critically important, I'll say something that's going to sound a little bit harsh in the first instance, and I don't mean it to be harsh, but the very question of hope is a question of privilege. Because in most of the world, it's really not a question. You must endure, right? And how we endure, the fact that we have options about how we endure is a reflection of a little bit of the sort of the privilege that we have. But it's crushed all of us at times. What we sort of move through and what we see what Mark just described. That it's crushing to know that you are amidst people who know the absolute truth about something, and then you watch them say the opposite in the most cynical ways for very, very small board transactional objectives. That's crushing. So as an emotional matter, we all have to grapple with it. I want to throw out a concept that actually brings it within reach of all of us, and that's the concept of stewardship. I look at a lot of things from the framework of stewardship for this reason. None of us are here to solve everything. All of us here aren't going to solve everything. And if we can separate hope out a little bit from ego, what it does is it brings us into the realm of stewardship. And Alicia, if you'll give me license here, I want to read that quote from the Talmud that I sent to you and to the cohort a few days ago, because for me, that ties to stewardship, because all that we are asked to do is what is within our grasp to do, to tend to our own gardens and to that which is immediately around us in a way that is socially and communally responsible. And if everybody does that, we start to go to a different place. But the quote is this: do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief, which we all experience, folks. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. We have no choice but to do the work. Do the work at a human scale within the measure of your own life. And if we all do that, somehow we will move the needle.
Thank you, Joe. That actually feels like a perfect place to stop, but I'm not going to, because we have one more question from Gabriel. And Julian, I see your hand up. Do you want to quickly chime in on hope?
I just wanted to say three things. One, I draw hope from the path traveled by those before me, and I draw a lot on my ancestors, and not only my direct ancestors, but other ancestors, which I make my own. Secondly, my faith. I'm a Catholic on purpose. I was a very frivolous Catholic, and after the hurricane, I became a Catholic on purpose. And I don't care what you believe in, if it's a higher being, it has to do with love, and we're all together. And number three, my daughter. I have this little picture of her here when she was very little. I don't know if you see it. She's sticking her tongue out at me every day. And she's 31 years old now. And I have to do, yes, Joe, we can't do everything, but we have to do everything that we can. And for her, I just look at her and look at her eyes and cannot be but mesmerized by the idea that within this human being, another generation of people that carried what my grandmother carried and my mother for me will go on. And she lives in a world where people of the same sex can get married and it's okay. And where we all can sit in a cafeteria, whether we're black or white, and it's okay. And where people can go into, send rockets into Mars, but we also live in a world where during a hurricane, you cannot put water 1,000 miles from the US coast. So I look at her and I say, I did this. I was allowed to bring this human being into this world, and I have to hope for her. And I think what Anna said is truth. Hope is action, is change in action. It's not just romanticism. It's this, rolling your sleeves and getting it done.
Well, I know that all of us here on the Zoom and the students in the audience are looking forward to rolling up their sleeves for this quarter and getting it done. I'm going to ask Gabriel to ask the last question, please.
Hey everyone, my name is Gabriel, and I'm a second year in the college majoring in political science and economics, and I'm actually an ambassador for Mayor Cruz this quarter, so it's great to finally meet you, and thank you to everyone. Really, it's been a privilege listening to you all. So for my question is, what would you argue, and this is for everyone, is the defining challenge for democracy moving forward, given both domestic and international challenges, and how can we, both as citizens and elected officials, restore faith in the democratic process and government's ability to enact positive change? Thank you.
It's a PhD right there.
Let me just start by saying I think that the era of self-interest from politicians has taken over any idea of servant-based leadership. I wrote my dissertation on servant-based leadership, and I try and find candidates who have that kind of a heart. But it just seems like so many of our elected officials, they're just in it for themselves. It's the best job they're ever going to have. They would rather do the wrong thing than possibly lose an election. So I think we're in an era of self-interest, and somehow all of us who have servant leadership hearts are going to have to fight back. And I think that's pretty rampant in both political parties. But the one thing I like about the Democratic Party at the moment is at least you've got some people speaking truth to power. Where on the Republican side, we've got Liz Cheney and other folks. But I think it's about money and power and not public service, which I think is a tragedy right now, which is kind of what Joe said, and I completely agree.
Yeah, I would just add, there is a PhD's worth of discussion there. It's a fabulous question. I want to offer that there are multiple major driving forces that I think you could see, some of which we discussed in our seminar today, behind the current crisis of our democracy. You can look at the ways in which economic inequality has spiraled so profoundly out of control, some of the work that Sarah's been doing to study how that shows up in people's experience of it. You can talk about the atomization, the fundamental atomization of modern society, the way we all feel separate from one another and not bound up with each other and responsible for the collective. And you could look at the backlash to demographic change that we've seen. That is to say, racism is a real driver of the crisis that we're in right now, I think in a profound way. So those each in and of themselves are profound dynamics, questions, and challenges to understand and unpack. But I think the way forward is going to be multi-pronged, and in any scenario is going to be more than any one court case, more than any one policy brief, more than any one think tank speech, certainly more than any one tweet. It's going to need to be a kind of multi-front, top to bottom, movement connected social movement project of renewing and reinvesting in and reimagining democracy as a project that we can govern ourselves and we can stay together. We can stay in relationship with each other through profound disagreement, and we can come out fairly on the other end of these profound disagreements and move forward as a society. That's the project. And I think we're at risk right now of fracturing even the fundamental project of being in conversation with one another, which is why, again, I think these kinds of spaces are incredibly important. We need to be talking with each other through disagreements, through discomfort, and finding our way forward together.
Gabriel, first of all, nice to meet you. I think three things. One is we need to talk about who is government for, what is government for, and from there put policies in place that benefit people and not the structure of government. We forget that government is there to serve the people. And it ends up being that government ends up being take an organization like FEMA. They have so many procedures to substantiate them being who they are rather than to do the right thing. But I agree with all the members of the cohort. First of all, the idea that you're asking that question is just hope right there.
On that note, we are well over time. I don't know if Joe and Sarah, you wanted to jump in really quickly.
I'll quickly say, I'm going to go existential, which is we've now established as our want as a group. And I think that this is in agreement with the previous answers. Ultimately, the fundamental challenge to democracy right now is human nature, as it, hopefully is evolving to what, Julian, I think, referred to as a higher consciousness. Many of our systems and some of our fellow Americans have a worldview that it is every man or woman or person for themselves. And there are those of us who have a worldview across political lines, by the way, that all of us are connected, interconnected, all things even. And I do think that is at the crux of just about every challenge that we face as a society is the fear and the anger that's tied up in a sense of surviving in a world that is perceived as a threat. There are people in the rural community where I live who have received messages that provoke their fear, and they're assembling veritable arsenals of weaponry. That's happening right now in this country where we enjoy incredible privileges at the global level in terms of security, and yet it's that perception that we must be living in fear that is driving, and sometimes in some cases becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So many of the challenges that democracy faces right now. I have a feeling on that note that Lotfullah probably has a lot to teach all of us on that question, but I applaud you for asking it.
Thank you.
I'll be very quick here. I think we all. I want to make a suggestion. I don't have an answer. I want to make a suggestion. This has been much on my mind lately. I think when we invoke the term democracy, it's something of a proxy for something that no one's called upon to actually define. It's something of a Rorschach blot. And if everybody actually had to speak to what they meant by democracy, we'd find out we're not actually all having the same conversation. And the reference to Lotfullah is an absolutely brilliant one for this reason. We were in Afghanistan to create a democracy. And we sold the notion that we were on the way to creating democracy and that we had created democratic institutions. And they were not self-sustaining. The reason that we're having a crisis of democracy is actually about a crisis of a machine that we all, not the new generation, but our generation, largely treated as a machine that went itself without nurturing and without investment. The social contract fell apart. We actually have to have a discussion about definitions about what we're talking about when we talk about democracy. That has to be a first place. And this is the very environment in which that conversation should be had.
Thank you. Lotfullah, I'm going to just give you a quick chance to have the last word.
Thank you. I think we can always be hopeful if we have a strong convictions and beliefs. And hope can only be met and realistic if it's based on some reality. You cannot be hopeful just for the sake of it. So I think you have to see things in the society that probably others don't see. And that's how you base your hope for better change. For Afghanistan's democracy, we are still hopeful because we see some seeds of a transformation change in that society. And democracies cannot operate in silos. Nationalism is one of the major, I think, challenges towards democratic orders in the world. There has to be, as you said, interactions. You promote bipartisan interaction in the US. Same applies to interactions with other democratic societies, in the world. Non-democratic systems I think, by trying to address some of the real issues in the world today is, I think, a challenge to democracy. If they are defining prosperity, if they are giving welfare to people in a different way, if they are giving hope and inspiration to people based on a different thinking, I think that's where, you know, those of us who believe in democracy should think and should try to address some of those questions. And by that note, I think you know, all of us have a lot of hopes for a lot of changes and to maintain a lot of democracies, especially the ones that are still there.
We have a lot to talk about this quarter. So I just want to thank each and every one of you, not just for being here with us tonight, but for being with us for the next 8 weeks. And we hope you all will join us out there in the ether. It's going to be a great quarter. So thank you so much, everybody, for being with us, and have a good evening.